a good beat. Why aren't you dancing?
Dancing is forbidden. 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 Dancing is forbidden.
Yoo-hoo, running crew! Welcome to Dancing is Forbidden, an Aqua Teen Hunger Force exploration. I am Ronnie, and on this podcast, I am usually watching through and talking about every Aqua Teen episode. And the one thing I've learned while doing this podcast is them Aqua Teens, they don't move on their own, all right? People have to make them move, and today we are talking to two of the longtime animators on Aqua Teen who bring our favorite characters to life. We have Nathan Churney and Joshua Mullinax, and between the two of them, they have touched basically every single bit of Aqua Teen content from 2003's Season 2, Episode 1, Super Birthday Snake, all the way up to 2023's Season 12, Episode 5, Anubis, and just about everything in between. I mean, Colon movie film for theaters, Plantasm, Aquadonk side pieces, even the commercials and promos we see, these guys have had a hand in. And since it's Aqua Teen, it's worth mentioning that they did more than just animation. They did special effects, compositing, all sorts of witchcraft. I'm really excited to have both of these guys on because if you've listened to this podcast long enough, you'll surely know that Aqua Teen was an insanely collaborative show to work on. Everybody involved, because it was such a small team, got to really inject their own sense of humor, their own personalities into this show we love so much, and that's why it's as great as it is. To kind of exemplify this, before we were recording, Josh said something very beautiful to me, and this was that he's basically spent his entire career outside of and after Aqua Teen really searching for the creative freedom that he had on Aqua Teen, and that's something that we'll hear from basically anybody who has worked on the show, of how much freedom they had, and in my opinion, that's why this show is as great as it is. So, of course, we're going through all sorts of little animation stories that they have about Aqua Teen. We also hear about the impact that Aqua Teen co-creators Matt Maiellaro and Dave Willis had on the animation process. Matt and Dave are not animators, so guys like Nate and Josh really, brought their vision to life. So we'll hear about that a little bit. Nate and Josh also have a writing credit on an episode of Aqua Teen, so we get into that, kind of how that came about. If you were worried that this Aqua Teen podcast wouldn't have any Twin Peaks talk, well, you can put those worries to bed because we're talking about Twin Peaks and we're talking about so much more. It's just, again, such a treat to have these guys on. And you know what? I actually learned, if you see the cover art for this podcast, that the character with the purple mohawk in Colon movie film is modeled after Nate Churney here, and then a character we'll see on Aqua Teen with blue hair is modeled after Josh Mullinax. So not only are they Aqua Teen animators, but they have become the animated. Worth mentioning, you can check the description for timestamps to see where the conversation goes. I also have links to things mentioned in the description. And also, you could find where to contact Josh and Nate. Now, neither of them are really on social media, but Josh does have a website, joshuamullinax.com, and Nate has a demo reel that you could check out. If you like the idea of an Aqua Teen podcast, if that gets you all frisky and hot and bothered, well, make sure that you follow the show, subscribe to the show, whatever the hell, wherever the hell you're listening, because we've got other interviews, for example, with co-creators Dave Willis and Matt Maiellaro. We've got many more to come. We've got episode deep dives. And you know what I've got? I've got a sincere thank you to Josh Mullinax for really reaching out and facilitating this to happen, and also for getting Nate Churney on the podcast, too. Thank you to both these guys for their time. And hey, let's go talk to them right now, huh? Why not? What do we got to lose? I'm actually going to start off with a listener question because I think this is a good place to start. So, supporter of the show, Swimwiki, their question is, how did it feel to return to the series after roughly 8 years? So let's start with you, Josh, because you started on with Aquadonk side pieces and Plantasm. How did it feel to kind of jump back into that?
It was so surreal in the best way to have worked on a show. Like, I literally started working on Aqua Teen in like the early 2000s, like 2003 or 4. That's whenever I first started working in animation. To work on something as like your first animation job in the industry, learning the ropes and all of that, and then sort of building who you are as an animator over the years, working on that show and other Adult Swim shows, and then going off and doing other things and coming back so much later to like dive back in. And it was so surreal and fun to like open up all of those assets again, like open up the rig. Nate, I opened up your After Effects rig, and it's one of those things where I hadn't animated in those rigs or for that show for so long. But then as soon as I opened up those files, it just all came back to me. I was literally like typing in the time remap numbers for, Carl's arm moves and just being like, oh yeah, it was, frame 32. Like I just remembered the frame that it was and like how to stitch together all of those early animations. But it was so much fun to work in that show again. And also to evolve it too. Like Nate, I just literally watched the first 3 episodes of the newest season. And it's so fun to see how that show still holds those little animation choices that we were making back in the early days, but it has evolved into something so beautiful and cool and impressive. Yeah, it's a great show to work on. But yeah, a lot of fun to return to.
Well, for you, Josh, it's kind of interesting because my impression is you guys did the side pieces first and then did Plantasm, and the side pieces was basically like the original animation, while Plantasm was like a whole new beast.
Yeah.
So you kind of got the best of both worlds there. Also with Plantasm being storyboarded, as is the new season, which we'll get to that with Nate here in a moment. But
yeah,
between like the old school Aqua Teen animation and then something more animated like Plantasm, do you have a preference between the two?
I mean, I love the new look of the show and how far they're taking it. When we animated the Aquadonk side pieces, that was actually all done in After Effects, much exactly like how we animated it back whenever I first started. And it, like I said, it was fun to go back into that style of animation. Plantasm was all animated in Toon Boom Harmony. And a lot of that, even the rigs and everything that we made for that show, it was all based on the original rigs that Nate made for whenever we were animating the show in After Effects. So I got to see sort of both sides of that, where I got to like reanimate again in After Effects and relive sort of that experience of what that was like, when also, helping the animators understand how the show was animated in After Effects so that they could animate it in Harmony. And being a part of, all of those animation meetings where I think whenever we first started, the animators were trying to over animate it in a way. And we were just like, oh, no, it can literally just be this eye move or something. I was like, we would constantly be referring back to our old episodes while still trying to evolve that style into something more impressive and new, and, encouraging animators to actually like redraw a character for a specific action, which is something that we never would have done
right
back in the original series. We had, character art, and sometimes we would incorporate like a new body for a character if there was like, somebody was turning into a zombie or something, but otherwise it was just the same art assets used over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was kind of fun to explore both of those worlds, but I love the direction that it's taking and the way that it still holds true to its origins while also bringing it into, a new generation of people.
Mm-hmm. Aquadonk side pieces, that was not storyboarded, right?
It was not storyboarded. I mean, it was done in the way that all of the original episodes were done. The editors would build animatics, and obviously that is sort of, it was always our version of a storyboard. It was just this, it was in a lot of ways what the editors did was very much sort of a first pass, which is extremely helpful as an animator, because you see, okay, these animators put together this thing that we can reference, that, the creators of the show had watched and like helped with the pacing, and then we could try to make it even better than that. Like that was the first pass, and we're just like, okay, our job was just to take it and make it whatever the next step was, the polished step after that. So yeah, in a lot of ways that was kind of our storyboard.
Gotcha. So for you, Nate, my impression is that you did not work on Aquadonk side pieces or Plantasm, but you jumped back in as an animation consultant on this current season 12. So first of all, how was it for you to get back to working on Aqua Teen after so long?
Well, I really don't want to take too much credit, because I was working on Archer at the time, and we were in the thick of things, and they really wanted me to get back into Aqua Teen somehow. So really, like, for maybe a day a week, I would come and like just watch what they've done, and then give notes. Like, basically, I was telling, I was looking at these really lovely animations and saying, no, this isn't how we do it. We do it really shitty. We'd have like I would watch for how fast the Frylock flip would be, like up and down, up and down. Like it's 40 frames going up, 40 frames going down, or how quickly we would animate pupils, what we would do on 2s or 1s, which is the technical animation thing. It was a lot of fun getting back into it, and now that Archer is dead, not technically, but now that the show is over, hopefully I can go back to Aqua Teen at some point and actually get my hands dirty again.
Archer is such a fun show to animate. Like it's so much fun. So complex, so much more complex and involved than Aqua Teen or any of the other shows we've ever made. But
although I did with Aqua Teen, I think because the animation was so limited, you really have to figure out timings and expressions and like really subtle kinds of way of expressing emotions, and I think that really helped with Archer animation, character animation.
Oh yeah.
What were your thoughts on how the show has been kind of evolved from Plantasm, kind of built upon that art style? Like, do you have any thoughts on the direction that it's taken since Plantasm?
Yeah, it's really like Josh was saying, it was really interesting to just see more animation. I was actually kind of surprised to see Carl had a walk cycle now.
Yeah.
Just the up down bob thing. But it is pretty fascinating to watch.
Well, I kind of want to take a step back to you guys getting into Aqua Teen. Nate, as I understand it, you had not seen the show before working on it with season 2, episode 1, Super Birthday Snake.
Nope.
Gotcha. Were you familiar with Space Ghost or any other Adult Swim stuff?
Yeah, I was vaguely familiar with a couple of Adult Swim things. I believe I had seen Space Ghost a couple of times, but really I was just kind of 3D modeling stuff for the Home Depot headquarters, and that's where Craig Harton used to work, and he was looking for animators right when my contract there was up. So I was just kind of in the right place at the right time, hop over and work on the show I'd never seen before. But it's very much my humor style, kind of strange, bizarre, nonsensical.
Yeah, just surreal, Dadaist, crazy style. For you, Josh, were you familiar with Aqua Teen before jumping in on season 3, episode 1's Video Ouija?
I think, yeah. So I used to meet up with a bunch of friends on Sunday nights to watch The Sopranos, I think. But while we were waiting for that show to come on, we would flip over to Adult Swim and watch whatever was on over there, just because it was that weird late night animation kind of thing. And I think the first episode that I watched was Leprechapolis.
Yeah, but I'm the only one that looks normal enough to go into town and buy us food. Isn't that right?
Normal? You're not even Irish!
Look, I told you when we met that I was not a leprechaun, that I was from Rhode Island, and that I was half Korean, and you said it didn't matter.
You're both yo-yos. Shut up, you yo-yos.
And I remember loving that episode and just being like, what is this? But I kind of knew. I didn't have cable, so it was just whenever I would go over to my friend's house, he would have cable and we would watch it there. But I think I remember learning about all of that Cartoon Network Adult Swim stuff. I think it was like reading Wizard magazine and like seeing an interview with Space Ghost or something strange like that, some magazine interview, and reading it as a kid and just being like, what is this? But being excited because I also remembered watching Space Ghost, like the original series, in the syndication whenever I was a kid. So yeah, I think it was kind of the idea of taking an old show, using the assets from an old show and like repurposing it to like make new art. Like that was really exciting to me. And so, yeah, that's how I first heard of that world, jumped in.
Right. Yeah. It was almost like a predecessor to a lot of kind of like YouTube videos and internet art where you see people repurposing popular content all the time while, back in the days of just really television at that point in the early mid 90s, it's like that was not something that was super common, at least done in that way.
Yeah, like even Aqua Teen too. Like that was, we were making the art for the show, but then like repurposing and reusing every asset of that anytime. Like anytime a character had to pick up an object, we were thinking, oh, like what episode was it where, Shake had this particular shaped hand that we would just reuse over and over again, just recycling as much as humanly possible. And even sometimes, taking art that we thought might work and just, completely gutting it and, in Photoshop, deleting various parts of it to make new things. And yeah, so much fun.
I was reading Nate talking about that in an interview where just like that's what a lot of what you guys would do is having to kind of Frankenstein these things together because you guys couldn't get these new animations. So you had to just do the best you could with old animations and cutting stuff together. I should ask, Nate, are you from Atlanta or at least Georgia?
Yeah, I'm from, I was born in Kentucky, but I moved here when I was 5. So I've been in Georgia pretty much my whole life.
Gotcha. And then what about you, Josh? Are you from Atlanta or Georgia as well?
No, I grew up in Southern Illinois, just this impossibly small town, and then came to Atlanta to go to college. And that's when I first started interning with the animation studio Radical Axis that made Aqua Teen. So I just kind of happened to fall into it and start working on it then.
Mm-hmm. I'm from northeastern Illinois. I'm from
nice,
kind of like an hour and a half outside of Chicago. So
that's great. I'm on the opposite end, southern end of the state as well.
Yeah, because I was almost in Wisconsin where I grew up. But so I guess because I know both of you guys seemingly went to college for animation, it appears. So Josh, when did you realize that you wanted to become an animator or at the very least work in television? Like, were you always into that stuff growing up or how did you fall into that?
I mean, I definitely always considered myself an artist, even though I feel like whenever you ask someone if they're an artist, they always immediately think of whether or not they draw. Like, I feel like that's kind of something that always comes up first. And I would always be drawing and doodling, but I never considered myself talented. But because of the era sort of that I, grew up and started experimenting with art, especially in high school and stuff, a lot of it was, in the rise of that, Macromedia Flash and, early Adobe Photoshop and After Effects and Premiere. And so I started diving into a lot of that in high school and sort of creating art in different ways using software, which is something that, I mean, even whenever I was in high school, we only had, one art class that utilized computers. And I think it was the only art class I took in high school was computer art. And that style of making art in a new, interesting technological way was really exciting to me. So that's kind of how I jumped into it that way.
For you, Nate, same question. Like, what made you realize you wanted to become an animator or work in television?
I started out kind of going more towards computer animation. I was always both kind of smart book side, but also artistic. So I think it was Jurassic Park, where it was like, I wanted to become a paleontologist for a while. So there was that, but then Jurassic Park came out and I'm like, no, I think I kind of want to animate these things. It would be fun to do that. So
it's tough to think about how you get into something like this animation. It's just something that kind of, I don't know, it just kind of happened. But then once I found it, and I'm sure Nate, the same for you, you just kind of fall in love with it. It's literally like breathing life into, drawings. Like, how much fun is that to take something like that and create movement? And, especially working on a show as like niche and cult, I think, as Aqua Teen is, like, that's hopefully going to live around forever. And to have a little part of that, like, that was so much fun to be a part of.
Nate, did you watch like a lot of animation when you were like in school?
Yeah, I've always liked animation. I think the big thing for me growing up was I always kind of had an interest in like movie special effects, watching behind the scene things. I guess throughout the 90s, that was like, big on the DVDs. So that was always fun to watch and getting more and more into computer animation. Then I kind of switched over to more 2D animation. Like Josh said, because a lot of kids grew up with Jurassic Park, a lot of them were becoming computer animators when I became a computer animator. So the job field was pretty saturated when I came out. So I was lucky to end up in 2D, and I really liked it. It's the way we kind of puppet the characters and move them. It really is a lot like 3D animation.
Mm-hmm.
Like we aren't drawing it; we're moving things at their joints.
I'm glad you said that, Nate, because like you had this interest in kind of special effects and stuff, but working on Aqua Teen, you guys got to do so much. Like it wasn't just animating 2D characters. You also did special effects, and I mean, there's even live action special features on the DVDs, like the Terraphone series, which I absolutely love, that you guys both worked on too. So you got to work in live action as well. So it kind of afforded you all sorts of experiences, I'm sure, as compared to some other things that you may have worked on. That actually leads me to another listener question. Supporter of the show, Karsen, wants to know, in terms of crediting, what was the difference between a like special effects credit and a VFX credit versus, say, an animation credit on Aqua Teen? Josh, could you kind of differentiate between those?
Yeah, that was something that I always thought was really hilarious about working in Aqua Teen is we were credited, I think, as it's like under special effects categories, or compositing, I think was something that we were constantly credited as. And I mean, at the time, I never even thought of it. Like whenever I got, an animation job after working on Aqua Teen, I had to keep reminding myself, like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm an animator, not a compositor, or not a visual effects, person. But I think it was because we were trying to differentiate between the 2D animators that would create new assets for each episode. Like Todd Redner was, going in there and like looking at the script and saying, okay, we need, a tooth fairy for this episode, so let's draw some options for that. He would create all of this amazing 2D character art that then would be scanned in, and then Nate and I would play with that in After Effects to animate those characters, breaking apart the joints, sequencing all of the animation together and adding effects on top of that. So it sort of turned into us being animation generalists, where we were doing, the puppet style animation within After Effects, but then also, adding in visual effects, particle effects, making things explode, blood, fog, water, like all this stuff. So we kind of had our hand in a little bit of everything as animators on that show. But I think it just kind of falls into this weird nebulous space of animation generalists. And it was always funny after that for people to call us compositors, because we're like, yeah, I guess we did composite the shots too, but we also animated them.
Yeah, I think one of the things with animation studios is typically larger studios, you have to be more of a specialist. Like you're good at compositing, or good at character animation or something specific, but with the smaller studios, you have a lot more that you're in charge of that you have to deal with like, so it's really a jack of all trades kind of situation, which
is really the norm for Aqua Teen and really any capacity besides, I guess, being a voice actor. Which of course, like somebody like Dave Willis was the king of multitasking, but guys like, I guess, Carrie and Dana, they just voice acted, but everyone else was almost doing like a bunch of different things.
Yeah, wearing a lot of hats, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. So I was hoping you guys could walk us through kind of the process of working on a typical episode. Now, I know that every episode was different. You kind of had different things, but I guess to kind of start us off, like, I know that you guys would start off, I assume, getting the animatic from the editors, but to the best of your ability, Josh, if you can kind of walk us through what that process looked like. And of course, Nate, feel free to jump in at any point.
Yeah, I mean, at least our sort of side of creating the show in After Effects definitely started with getting those animatics from the editors, which would have the entire radio play married to very rough animation, where the editors would think that the camera cuts would be roughly what was happening. Like, if Shake were, picking up an object or something like that, sometimes it would literally just be like, the image of the object that he's holding just floating over his hand or something. But every aspect of that show, I mean, we would start it by, like I was saying, getting the scripts from, Adult Swim, Matt and Dave delivering the scripts, and that would go to the 2D department. They would start creating new sketches for the new characters that were in that episode, the new villains, the monster of the week style villains they would have for every episode. And also, reading the scripts and finding out, oh, is there, a particular arm or gesture or body or something that we need for Carl, and having to draw that and sketch it out. I was a part of the digitizing station that we had set up that would literally, because Todd would animate all of these new characters and everything on paper. Like, it was all sketching everything out, inking it with pencil, and then scanning that into Photoshop. And so I would scan each cell, in our little scan station, bring it into Photoshop, do a bunch of cleanup on the art itself, do the paint, then sequence all of that stuff in After Effects, import all of the art, all of the individual frames that we would need, and start creating sort of basic rigs for these new characters, and then updating our old main characters with their new assets and stuff like that. So, but yeah, as for when the animation started in After Effects, and when we were building the show, once we got those animatics and we would watch through the episodes, I mean, that's when it would jump off. We would split it into individual chunks, kind of assign those scenes out, and then we would just get to creating and polishing and building it into what you saw when it aired on TV.
Does that check out, Nate? Is he right, or is he lying to us?
I think he's pretty good. He most of the bullet points.
How often would you guys interact with Matt and Dave, like, while working on an episode?
They were always at the studio. I mean, it was kind of they would pop in for reviews. That's probably when we saw them the most often, is whenever they would come in for episode reviews. Whenever we would finish something, they would watch it through with us. Honestly, it was kind of the most fun part of working on that show, was just seeing what we could create and what Dave and Matt, or what we could get them to laugh at,
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm sure, Nate, you feel the same, but they always wanted us to go over the top and
just make it funny. That's what they said.
Yeah, just make it funny. There was nothing that was too much. And if it ever did get to the point where it was too much, they would dial us back. But they always wanted us to go to the extremes. And as long as it was funny and it made us laugh, and then being able to be in a review where we got to see them laugh at the things that we made, like, that was, the best. That was what we strived for.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's probably our biggest interactions with them. But then also, as we were, doing character designs and building the rigs and showing the new animations and stuff, I remember many times where Dave and Matt would be in the studio and just see what we were working on over our shoulders and give us notes on little things and try to act it out. Dave was always really big at acting things out. I remember this one time, I can't remember what episode it was, but Carl was chatting with a guy in a tracksuit. They were like pushing and shoving each other around. And Dave was just like, no, it needs to be more like this. And he was like picking me out from my desk and like shoving me around the studio, trying to explain like how Carl would be pushed around by this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they were always a part of, the creative process in that creation of that show.
It's that Buddy Nugget?
Buddy Nugget. That's the one I was thinking of.
Multiverse versions of Carl.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember if there was any particular episodes that took like a really long time to get right, that like you had to keep going back and like editing things on?
Ooh, that was another kind of great thing about that show, is that at no other show that I've ever worked on, I felt that we had the most sort of freedom with what we did, but also freedom with the amount of time that it took us to do things. I'm sure it's not the case, but it's me thinking back to just this feeling of, oh, we could just take as long as we wanted. That wasn't the case. Obviously there were schedules, but
yeah.
I don't know if it was just because it was my first animation job and I was just like, oh, it'll just be done when it's done. But a lot of times it just kind of felt that way, where we could just take the time that we needed to build something. I mean, the first Aqua Teen movie kind of comes to mind. That was the first time we had dove into building anything at 2K resolution. Like, everything before that was standard definition. And making that movie, we were just like, oh, let's do everything in, high def. And the computers that we were working on at the time, I mean, they would struggle to render that stuff. It was, Nate, I don't know if you remember, but I remember us finishing the movie, rendering out the 1920 by 1080 renders for all of the scenes, but our computers that we were working on at the time couldn't play the renders at real time. Like, I don't know if it was the codec we were using or what, but we couldn't just watch the renders. And so Nate and I just had a couple of days where we just sat there with QuickTime open, holding down the right arrow key just to progress the frames and just watch it in slow motion, just to see. And we still missed like the most obvious like pops and errors for that entire movie, but I don't know. I guess we knew where all the bodies were buried and all of the little mistakes that we made along the way. But yeah, that was one that I felt like we spent a ton of time on, just from a technological stand. It just took us a while to build something as grand at that time, even though it wasn't really even that grand, but for us, it felt like it.
And I'm sure that you guys are laughing at that idea now of like, really, that's what we were.
Yeah. And now, I mean, even with Plantasm, that was the first time we made that jump into 4K, which, I mean, was such a hilarious idea to think about, opening up these old assets that, were literal Photoshop scans from paper and being like, okay, let's make this 4K. What do we got to do to up-res all of this art again, after, like, I think the art that I was providing to the animators for them to recreate in Harmony were literally the same Photoshop files that we had used to build the show in standard definition, that we had then blown up in Photoshop and, used a technique. I think Craig and me and Nate were figuring out like how we were going to like up-res these characters so that they weren't blurry. It was those same files that we just like passed along to building it at 4K.
Didn't Craig get his wife to help out with that at some point?
Yeah, I think everyone had a hand in trying to figure out how to, because we had, I mean, it was so many layers. This was before any kind of automation, or especially now, like, using AI to like automate, processes and stuff like that. This was all just, someone had to literally sit there and be like, oh, this is Shake's turn number 3. We need to like up-res that one drawing. And yeah, the painstaking process that took to get it there.
Supporter of the show, Joe, would like to know, what's the most complex animation you worked on for the show?
I like to think that we definitely did some complex stuff. I got one that pops into my head, Nate, working on Spy, the episode Spy. Like, that was pretty complex when we were working on it. Like, you were literally, I remember you went and like bought a video game controller in order to like animate the 3D Aqua Teen car thing. Like, Nate did all of the 3D animation for that episode. Like, we hadn't done stuff like that before. Like, that felt like it was such a step outside of our comfort zone. That was pretty complicated.
I would like to mention that episode is commonly known as Last Dance for Napkin Lad, for anybody who doesn't know the in term for it.
Yeah, we that's the other funny thing. Every episode that we had would have a code name for the most part. Sometimes that would be the same as the actual episode name.
Yeah.
But were
they actually code names or just something that would get changed later?
Yeah, I think it was just whatever the temp name was that the editors would start with. This episode would be known as Spy, but then later it would change to Last Dance with Napkin Lad, which is a much better title for sure. But
Nate, do you remember any sort of, like, besides that episodes, any sort of like complex bit of animation that you had to work on?
Well, I remember not quite the answer to this question, but I remember for the movie when Dr. Weird turns inside out.
Can you help him move out?
Inside out?
You know what? I'm just gonna let you have this one.
Clay Croker, the animator, he called that like his, I think he labeled the file Magnum Opus or something like that.
Yeah, it was Magnum Opus. Yeah.
I ended up covering the whole thing with blood, so you couldn't really see much of it.
Yeah, I remember in the commentary, I think he's talking about that, or on some special feature, and just like how much time and I think how much money it costs to do that animation too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most impressive ones from the show. Nate, what is something that you wish you knew when you started working on Aqua Teen? So in terms of like animation, like is there a specific bit of advice you might have for yourself back in 2003 when you first started working on Aqua Teen?
I think we really kind of, I was the one who kind of brought the writing Java expressions for After Effects into it. At the time, it was pretty much just turning layers on and off, like 0% opacity to 100% opacity for, just change the layer on and off. So I really wish I had known. Well, I did know coding, but I didn't realize that you could really do that in After Effects. After Effects is kind of a fun program where it's like you could teach pretty much anyone, like my nephew, to use it more or less in an afternoon, but there's like still little shortcuts and things I'm still finding 30 years later.
Right.
Yeah, that is really true. Nate, your rig, I mean, that, Nate literally took this show, like he was saying, from something where it was just turning off the various layers that build up a character, just turning the opacity on and off, to building these really incredible complex rigs at the time, for sure, that we used for so much of that series. The entire time I was there, like, it was all based on those rigs. I remember it was the first time I had seen a complex rig like that used a lot of that JavaScript stuff, and just trying to understand how it worked was like something that I was constantly trying to figure out. But I remember that you hid a layer in one of the comps that you like, as you're animating, there would be no reason why you would go into this comp, because everything was controlled outside of the comp.
Could you define what a comp is?
Oh, sorry. Think of it like folders within folders, right? So like if you had a bunch of layers that would make a body, you could create a folder that contained all of this, the container of all of those layers. So Nate had made this container, this comp, that you would have no reason to go into, because everything was scripted outside of that. But me, being the dumb, beginner animator that I was, would always go into that comp. But Nate had named the only layer inside of that comp Josh Sucks. And so every time I would go in there, it would just be this constant reminder of just like, oh, I don't need to be here. Nate's telling me I don't have to be here. But yeah, those rigs, I mean, they were so much fun to animate in once you sort of got the hang of it. But even, yeah, Nate, animating on Archer years and years later, and just seeing the complexity that we could have built any of those comps at.
To be fair, they had a number of people working on it, and they pretty much they might have built off of what we did originally, because After Effects really wasn't built for our kind of animation. So
exactly.
Yeah.
It was very innovative. Nate, you did a lot for that show when we first started.
Actually, I think that would go back to your earlier question about what would be the most complicated animation I worked on. I think maybe Mouth Quest, the clay animation episode. I had to write a lot of code for that one, where it would it would cycle between. It would choose a random frame of 3 or 4 different frames of the character's shape with the fingerprints in them. So as the mouth would change, the shape of the character would also change a little bit, and everything would jitter around just a little bit. So there was a lot of coding I had to do for that one.
So that episode wasn't claymation then? Was it all just 3D?
Not even 3D. Well, they built the characters in clay and photographed them, and then we took them all into so it's kind of like photoshopping everything. It really was a lot of fun, that episode. But I'm glad that it reads as an actual clay animated piece.
Yeah. And the way that you guys did it actually sounds a lot smarter than what I was thinking that you did.
Yeah, always trying to cut corners. That's what we have to do in the limited animation genre.
Right. Josh, for you, is there anything that you wish that you could tell yourself back in 2003, 2004 when you started working on Aqua Teen? Any sort of advice that you would have had?
Oh boy, if I could go back in time, I think I would just remind myself to enjoy what I was doing. I have constantly been chasing the feeling of being able to animate on that show, and just having sort of that freedom of the amount of time it would take us to build things, as well as just being able to looking at those animatics and just being like, how can I make this funnier?
Mm-hmm.
And just doing wild and crazy things. Like, it was so much fun. So I think I would just go back in time and tell myself, hey, you're never going to be able to experience this again. Just have fun doing this.
Right.
Yeah, man. There's so much. I think all of the current way that the show is animated is so much an evolution of what we had built upon. I love the direction of everything that we are doing now for that show. If anything, I think, showing my old self, the way that show evolved would be really fun, just to see how much further you could take things with the skill of all of the, the new animators that are working on that show. They do a fantastic job.
Listener Karsen has another question for you guys, and Karsen wants to know, what was your favorite episode to work on? Nate, do you have one that pops to mind? Not necessarily like your favorite episode, just one that you have a lot of fond memories of working on.
Yeah, that is pretty tough. Josh?
That is such a tough question. I was trying to think of when I was looking back to, like, scanning through some old episodes recently, and I was remembering Egg Ball. That was a really fun one to work on.
Oh, Contact Lens.
Contact Lens was great.
Contact Lens, because we helped write that one, kind of.
Right, I was going to ask about that. Yeah, so that one's released as Laser Lenses.
Yeah.
And I saw that you guys have credits on that for writing, so could you kind of walk us through what that looked like?
I think that was mostly, Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember Dave and Matt, approaching us about the possibility that we could submit scripts or ideas or something. And I remember being extremely busy on other things at the time. And so, Nate, I think you pretty much wrote the entire script that we submitted.
Well, it was
that's what I remember.
Yeah, it was Craig Carton and us too. So we kind of just sat in a conference room and just brainstormed out basically more or less all our ideas, and then I just took it home and wrote it up, like, pretty much in a night, I guess.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And the the episode that we delivered was not used verbatim. Obviously,
Nope.
I think that we're credited as having story elements in quotes, but the idea of Frylock having contact lenses, I think, was the big thing that carried over to the episode.
I think that was my idea, and that ended up being that was just like a little side joke that we made in the episode that we wrote, and that kind of became they just took that and ran with it and threw in a couple of our jokes that we had written.
That one did feel special to animate, only because it was exciting to know that we had a little piece of that at the beginning, so that whenever we started animating that episode, that episode is like fairly effects heavy. Shake is just like lightning destroying everything in the house, and there's dust everywhere. Like, that was a lot of fun to just kind of go ham on and make something weird.
Also, I think it ended up being like one of my favorite episodes, even like in the end, just overall, probably top 5 at least.
I know you guys are kind of like downplaying it because you're like, oh, they didn't really use like a lot of what we did. But the fact that Matt and Dave wrote that entire show, I think it's, whenever I see any sort of writing credit on it, it's pretty substantial, because that did not happen a lot. Nate, did you had you written scripts and stuff before then? Did you mess around with writing before then?
No, that was pretty much first time.
Gotcha.
Just gave it a shot.
Would you happen to have the script still?
I don't know, Josh. I don't
think I do either. I'm sure it exists somewhere.
Gotcha.
Anytime, we always kept all of our files very organized and on our studio server at the time. But at the end of every season, we would take everything that we had in that Aqua Teen folder and put it on hard drive. So it exists somewhere in the Turner archives that we would deliver to William Street. So I'm sure somewhere out there's a PDF with our names on it, but I don't have access to it.
Gotcha. Well, if you guys run across it, let me know. I'd love to do something on that. That'd be really cool to see. So I know I kind of asked you like favorite episodes to work on, but do you have any just like favorite episodes as a viewer of the show?
I mean, my favorite, like I was saying, my favorite episodes would probably be those early episodes that I was watched whenever I was first introduced to the show, like Leprechapolis, or I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen Rabot.
Yeah.
Just in those early days, it was just always on Adult Swim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Man, yeah, my favorite episodes. I don't know that I have like a favorite, but there are so many individual moments out of all of those episodes that we worked on that every time I would hear it, I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there are so many times where I would hear a bit of dialogue and I'd be like, oh man, that was the funniest. Like I remember animating that. It was so fun. But
I think that's one of the things that made an episode more enjoyable to work on would be the actual audio dialogue recorded, because we would end up just quoting it over and over as we worked on it.
Yeah.
But that's one of the let's say special things about doing the lip sync is you hear the audio over and over again in little chunks just for days at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nate, you basically lip synced that entire shit. Like I very rarely did lip sync. I would, whenever I first started, I would do sort of like a first pass setup. But then, I mean, after that, I mostly just focused on character animation and I would just always leave the lip sync to you. I think you always ended up doing, you probably heard the dialogue for that show over and over again more than anyone else.
So Josh, you said that you left the lip sync for Nate. Is that something that like you guys could kind of decide what you worked on?
I think I don't know if it was just because I was very green, but I mean there were a lot of times where each of us would animate something and then the other person would do another pass or do notes on it, and we kind of always just shared our work a little bit. Yeah. Every now and then there were certain scenes where we would feel a sense of no, this is mine. Like I want to do everything in this. But for the most part, I think we just constantly pass files back and forth and work on each other's stuff.
I think I had never done any sort of lip sync before, but I think it was pretty much Craig just didn't feel like doing lip sync anymore, because that was way back in the beginning when I started doing lip sync. So he just assigned it to me one day, and I kind of took over from there.
Nate, to sing your praises, because a lot of people are like, oh, Aqua Teen is so limited on animation, but I feel like the lip sync was always done to a very high quality, especially compared to a lot of other animation shows. I'd like to move on to, we'll go through here and go through some of your guys' favorite things. I'll ask you a little bit about yourselves, and this will be the same question to each of you. So, Nate, what is your favorite film or one of your favorite films?
When you sent us these questions, it seemed so hard. I couldn't narrow anything down. But for favorite film, I think I could go with Jurassic Park, maybe 12 Monkeys, and Cemetery Man. That's a kind of obscure horror movie there. But
I'm not as familiar with that one. Yeah,
it's also known as a Del Morte Dell'Amore.
Oh, okay.
The other name for it. It's Italian and it's based on a graphic novel.
That rings some bells.
An existential zombie movie.
What about you, Josh? What's a favorite film?
Those are all great picks, Nate, especially Cemetery Man. That's based on Dylan Dog, the Italian comic. My favorite movie ever made is Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Speaking of 12 Monkeys, Nate. Brazil, I saw at just the right time in my life. It is an amazing, trippy, visually stimulating, insane movie that has echoed so many aspects of my life. It's strange, and I just love that movie so much. Ronnie, I was telling you earlier, I have a film club that I run with some friends called VHS Party, where I just have some friends over every month and we watch weird movies that I find at thrift stores on VHS, and I screen it with through a projector. So we have watched so many insane, culty, bizarre films. The one that I always say is always my favorite is Heavenly Bodies, which is this, I think it's Canadian aerobics film. It's just amazing, and I could just watch it over and over again, and it's so stupid. But so many of the movies that we've watched for that, I would say, are my favorites, especially because I have such fond memories of just watching them with this film club and laughing and I don't know, just seeing stuff that you could have easily gone your entire life with just never have even hearing of any of these things. Nate, you and I love film noir. I remember Nate really got me into film noir back in the day. So, watching Double Indemnity and Third Man and all those amazing early noirs. That's another fave of mine. I like David Lynch a lot. I like a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Nate, you and I were chatting about like not having, this is my favorite movie. Like you can't just like say one thing. It's just this list of like, I literally have a list in my phone of
Right.
amazing movies. The most recent movie that I watched that I loved was Bottoms. That movie was hilarious.
You also really like the Evil Dead movies.
Evil Dead. We watched like at the time, especially in early Aqua Teen, whenever we were working on that show, we were constantly trading horror movies back and forth of just weird stuff that we found. A lot of that, I mean, just watching Aqua Teen, around season 4 or 5 in there, like everyone always complains. They always talk about the upping the violence. Like there was definitely Nate and I sort of like playing with the over the top horror violence with a lot of the Aqua Teen animation stuff that we were doing, all because we were just watching a lot of Evil Dead and Dead Alive and all of those amazing movies.
For the movie, I think I said like my goal was to get it an R rating. And it really didn't take too much. I really don't understand how that movie got an R rating. It's pretty tame, but it's the MPAA.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Nate, favorite TV show?
I don't even know where to begin. I really like Black Sails. It was a pirate based around kind of the prequel to Treasure Island. It really did an impressive job of merging actual pirates with more of the fictional pirates. Like Blackbeard was on there. You had Calico Jack and Bonnie, but it was really well done. The first season is a little rough. I feel like the producers are kind of Game of Thrones was really big at the time, so it kind of felt like they were saying, "Yeah, make it like super edgy, like Game of Thrones, do all this." But it's got a really satisfying ending and that's kind of hard to say for shows. But
right, especially Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that would probably be one of my favorites if it had stuck the landing in the end. But Always Sunny, Barry, Gotham. I just watched Scavenger's Reign.
Oh, I've heard that's good.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. It's beautifully animated, except for the first shot. The first shot is really static. It's like two characters that don't even matter in the end. They're just in Archer we would call them drones, just background characters. But just stick through the first shot, and everything looks beautiful afterwards. But Ash versus Evil Dead. I like the Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass. I guess some of the shows that were I loved growing up: Star Trek, TNG, Dr. Katz, Kid in the Hall, and Full House.
Oh, there you go.
I unironically like Full House.
Yeah, that's a good show.
Yeah,
the original one. I don't know about the reboot.
I watched a few episodes of the reboot. It was pretty good. It was interesting, but I don't know. I lost interest at some point and moved on. Mm-hmm. Maybe got too busy. But
what about you, Josh? Favorite TV show?
This was harder for me. I don't watch a ton of TV. Twin Peaks is amazing. I mentioned Lunch earlier. Season 3 was probably the most fun I've had watching TV recently. Just dissecting every single one of those episodes and the weird ways that it made me feel like was such a fun thing to do and talk to other people about. Like I haven't had a show where I would watch an episode and then be so excited to go to work and just talk to the people that I know also watched the episode and just like trying to come up with our weird theories about what the show's about or what, the way it made us feel.
Something that shocked me was I was talking to Matt Maiellaro about like his David Lynch inspirations, because we see a lot of it throughout Aqua Teen. And he said that he's only seen the 3rd season of Twin Peaks and he loved it. But I'm like, how do you only see the 3rd season and not the first 2? Because it's built upon.
Yeah, I think you could totally do that. It's such a different vibe.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Goes in so many different directions, but yet is still communicating the same thing, which is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Is it episode 8? That's the really crazy one.
Yeah,
I think that one could stand on its own. Really.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
I'm trying to remember what it was like. Black and white? Was it in black and white?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were bits of it that were in black and white. They had the nuclear explosion.
Yeah, the atom bomb. Yeah.
All of the lumberjacks and the gas station.
Yeah.
Fascinating wonderful stuff. I love watching that show. Other show, How To with John Wilson, is one of my current favorites. I guess it's over now. I don't know if they're making more of that show, but the seasons that are available is such a fascinating voyeuristic look at just random weird bits of New York City and beyond. That was such a fun show to watch. And the last one I have on my list is a UK show called Taskmaster that I have been watching. It's just a weird sort of British panel show, improv comedy based kind of weird show that is a lot of fun. But yeah, those are my favorites. Interestingly enough, none of them are animated, which I thought was kind of funny as I was looking back.
Yeah. Nate, do you have what are some of your favorite bands?
I really like Muse. I think maybe my favorite band of all time, 80s Matchbox Beeline Disaster. It's a mouthful and no one knows it, but Edgar Wright was he directed a few of their music videos, and he even included like a couple nods and references in Shaun of the Dead, and one of their songs is in Shaun of the Dead. But lately I've been listening to a lot of Ice Nine Kills and Tubbering, which is a band I've kind of gotten into a lot recently, like listen over and over again. I went to a whole bunch of concerts this year. I saw Muse live earlier at the Shaky Knees Festival. Ginger, Disturbed, that was at a concert with Breaking Benjamin. That was a really good. All these are good concerts, but I saw Tool live.
Oh, that's cool.
That's a really awesome band to see live, as well as Muse.
We were always sharing music too. Whatever you were playing in the car, going to lunch and stuff like that over the years. A lot of really amazing punk stuff that I remember us listening to as well.
Bad Religion was one of my favorite bands too.
What about you, Josh? What are some of your favorite bands?
Right now, this year, I've been listening to Caroline Polachek almost exclusively.
Nice. Yeah.
Welcome to my island. Hope you like me. You ain't leaving.
That Desire I Want to Turn Into You album, I just cannot stop listening to. It is so good. And I typically don't find myself listening to pop per se, or art pop, or whatever genre you would categorize that. But I think it's just an amazing album. And I love her voice, and the way that she constructs songs is mind blowing. And I really, really love her a lot. Death's Dynamic Shroud, they're always a weird, fantastic headspace to sort of put yourself into. And old stuff, like I talked about Devo, like I love Devo. Talking Heads, I love Talking Heads stuff. Sparks are amazing.
Nate, do you have a favorite album?
Actually, like, if I could go back for a second, the other big concert that I can't believe I forgot was The Cure.
Oh, shit.
I got to see The Cure live. Yeah.
That's a big one.
I think maybe the favorite one of all time, and I think because it actually it's a little historical, but Refused, Shape of Punk to Come.
Great album.
That kind of marked the end of 90s punk and moved everything into post-punk. And it's a really good album to listen to. It sounds a little dated because they use a lot of techno noises, but I guess techno is kind of coming back. So
Yeah.
I would say as well, Muse, Origin of Symmetry is a really good album that I listen to over and over again.
What about you, Josh? Any Any favorite albums?
I'm literally looking through my phone. The album that I feel like I can always come back to and listen again and again and again is a band named Ice Choir.
Oh, I love Ice Choir.
They have an album called Designs and Rhythm that I can just always put on, and it just always is amazing. I love that 80s inspired synth pop style construction. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, Kurt Feldman of Ice Choir, he does like all sorts of really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing.
All right, Nate. So do you have a favorite game? This could be a video game, a film, whatever.
I really like Tetris. Tetris is something I always end up going back to.
Oh, man. I got really addicted to Tetris 99 on the Switch. What about you, Josh?
The most recent game that I played that blew my mind and is currently my favorite game ever made is Elden Ring. That game, I never played a FromSoft game, and I just picked it up. Someone recommended it. I picked it up and started playing it, and the visual storytelling, the environmental storytelling in that game is just next level insane. And it is a very difficult game. I know everyone's always going to tell you that FromSoft games are like impossibly hard,
right?
But I'm a terrible video game player, and I was so fascinated with existing in that world that I was literally just like in a crouch position, just crawling through the levels just so that I can slowly take everything in and see everything that game has to offer. But that's most recently been the game that I cannot stop thinking about and going back to. Otherwise, anything Nintendo, Mario Kart. I mean, ever since I was in college, every iteration of Mario Kart that's come out, we've always played with friends, and anything Nintendo puts out is always just so well constructed and safe and fun. And I mean, any Zelda game or any Mario game, and any of that's Animal Crossing. There's a lot of fun Pokemon, that kind of stuff. It's great.
All right, and our last question, because you guys work on this silly show about talking fast food products. Nate, do you have a favorite fast food restaurant, like a burger joint or whatever?
Taco Bell.
Taco Bell. Can't go wrong with it.
I knew Nate was going to say Taco Bell, like immediately. There was like no question that Nate would say Taco Bell.
What about you, Josh? What's your go-to?
I don't eat a lot of fast food. My guilty pleasure is cereal. That's not fast food, I know, but I love having a bowl of cereal like at 10:30 at night every night. It's this weird ritual that I've done since I was a child. I'm part of the 10:30 p.m. cereal club, I guess, and just a sugary bowl of whatever fun cereal. That's my guilty pleasure food. Yeah, I don't eat fast food.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all right because cereal is equally as bad for you. So
exactly. You got to have something.
Yeah. Before we head out, is there anything that you guys would like to add that we didn't touch on that you think is worth mentioning?
Mortal Kombat is also one of my favorite game series. I showed you my Gretsch guitar that I just got. That's purple and beautiful, but I named her Sindel after the Mortal Kombat character.
Nice. That's great.
I've been thinking about that guitar ever since you showed it to us last week. It's so beautiful.
Ronnie, I was going to tell you, I know obviously you're going through episodes. You're kind of like right at the point that I started, right? Like what season are you in currently with your recaps?
I'm almost halfway through 4. You started right on season 3. So I've covered a handful, a good amount of your episodes.
You're getting sort of into that, like the meat of episodes that I feel like, both Nate and I, worked the hardest on and stuff. So if ever you need any additional stuff, like send me an email and just say, hey, do you remember anything about Grim Reaper Gutters or just whatever episode? And
I need to. Because I always feel bad because I don't want to be like, hey, at 3 minutes and 47 seconds on this episode, what?
Oh, man.
Do you remember this from 20 years ago? What was happening here?
I got nothing going on, man. You can bug me anytime.
All right, now Josh here, he's just being modest, all right? He has a lot going on. Not only is he working in freelance animation still, but I don't know if I'm supposed to say this. I hope it's okay. But he also bought a bookstore with some of his friends. So he co-runs a bookstore as well. I think he's plenty busy, but I wanted to include this here because above anything else, I want you to know how excited the people who just put their heart and soul into this show are, that we on this podcast care enough about all these little intricacies of Aqua Teen, these things that for some reason people haven't really talked that much about until now. And I want you to know how willing they are to help with this and how much they appreciate that we still care about this show so much. And that is not the case for other shows that these guys have worked on. And I'm not trying to speak for Nate and Josh here, but also I'm kind of speaking for just a lot of other people who we've talked to on the podcast who have worked on other shows that they are not quite as excited to talk about, but they're all very excited to talk about Aqua Teen. And as such a huge fan of this show, every single time, it never gets old for me how excited these guys are to talk about this fantastic show that we love and they love as well. So it means a lot to me as a fan of the show how happy these guys are to relive this show. And there's so much more in this conversation that I loved. For example, the fact that these guys, like, they really had to go in and memorize aspects of previous episodes that they could reuse in future episodes to make those work. I mean, we talk about that constantly on the podcast in the deep dives. I'll be like, hey, Carl just did that run that he did in a previous episode that we saw for the first time there, or something along those lines. And that didn't happen just by happenstance. I mean, these were the guys making those decisions and having that encyclopedic memory that made Aqua Teen work. And it was those decisions that we are talking about 20 years later. So, of course, hearing that is such a thrill. To a personal note, for me, something I loved hearing, I loved all the music that both Nate and Josh had to talk about. I love bands that both of them were mentioning, both bands that I was familiar with and unfamiliar with. For example, I'm not familiar with the Refused record, The Shape of Punk to Come, but after listening to it to get a clip, I'm like, holy crap, I gotta check this out. And it was cool to hear Josh mention Ice Choir, because they're a band I really love, and I've never heard anybody talk about them before. But, back to Aqua Teen, it was cool to hear how much Matt and Dave were in the animation suite, I guess, down at Radical Axis, really looking over these things. Again, Matt and Dave are not animators, but they did care about how the animation looked, and they did have an impact on that. So I think that's important to note, that they were involved as much as they could be. But to take a step in the other direction, again, one of the missions of this podcast is for you as an Aqua Teen fan to understand how much of an impact these individuals had on this show. That I think it was Nate said here that, like, their job was to make it funny. Their job really was to make Matt and Dave laugh, and that was their favorite thing to do. And one of the best parts of working on Aqua Teen is to get those guys laughing at stuff that Nate and Josh came up with, and same thing like with Bob Pettit coming up with funny art gags, and just everybody coming up with the best that they possibly could to make this show great. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I certainly enjoyed getting to have it, and just a huge thank you to Josh and Nate for coming on the podcast and giving us their time. Again, check the description if you would like to find ways to kind of get in contact with them. Again, Josh has his website. As of this recording, there's really nothing on it, but he is planning to eventually maybe put up some of his like VHS rips and stuff that he's been doing. He's very big into VHS. You should have seen his background. It's a whole wall of VHS back there. So he's planning to use that eventually, I believe. So keep an eye on it. And again, with Nate, you can check out his demo reel and leave a comment for him if you so choose. But all right, that is it for me this week. Thank you so much for listening in. If it wasn't for you listening, there'd be no reason to have these kinds of conversations. And of course, thank you to our supporters of this podcast, the people who head on over to patreon.com/dancingisforbidden, giving their hard-earned cash every month so that I can continue to do this podcast. I love doing this podcast. I want to keep doing it, but I can't keep doing it without the help of those who support this show. And they're not just getting my thanks here. For example, they get to submit questions for whenever I interview people on the podcast from Aqua Teen. And you never know who's going to pop up on the podcast, so you're just going to have to get on there and find out ahead of time. They also get an exclusive episode every month where we deep dive into other Aqua Teen stuff like Space Kataz, Baffler Meal. We even did a 9-part series on movie film for theaters. That's a long son of a bitch, let me tell you. We also dive into other Adult Swim shows, but through the lens of Aqua Teen Hunger Force. We see how it compares and contrasts. I upload nude photos of myself there that people just love to see. Oh, wait, no, that's my OnlyFans, never mind. But you know what? You know who's supporting harder than anybody else out there? Our Highlander, Nick.
There can be only one!
There's only one bit of Aqua Teen content in the past 20 years that Nate or Josh have not touched, and to my knowledge, that is the recent Pop-Tarts commercial, just like there's only one Nick. A bit of a stretch here, okay? But I wanted to say it. Neither of them worked on that Pop-Tarts commercial, so that's the one thing I could think of. Well, okay, actually, no. There's a second thing. I don't think that they touched Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am, the video game. But did you really expect them to? It's a video game. And of course, shout out to our number one in the Hood G tier patrons, Sean, Ian, Captain Buford, Robinson, Jason, Carl, Leshera, Tone69, Empower 706, Swimwiki, Karsen, Lurvinator, Tegan, and Thorin, the Grumpy Dwarf. You guys can open the folder that says Josh sucks any day of the week. I'll see you next week for another interview. Holy smokes. Let me tell you, you're going to want to get some French fries for that one. Wink, wink. All right, bye-bye. See you then. Bye-bye.
Dancing is forbidden. Dancing is forbidden.
Oh, Josh, if I could ask you really quickly, because you worked on Aquadunk Side Pieces and then Plantasm, but you did not work, or Andy worked on Yenor as well, which was something Matt Maiellaro was working on, but you did not work on Postocalypse. Is that because you just left Bento at that point, or?
Yeah, like it always happens as a freelance animator. I'm constantly jumping back and forth between whatever studio will keep me employed at the time. So I've definitely worked at Bento for probably the longest extent after Radical Axis. But yeah, jumping over to Floyd County or jumping over to Awesome Incorporated, I have good relationships with all of those studios. So I was constantly just kind of hopping around, but it always happened where, I would finish a project at a certain studio and try to look for the next job. And say I would hop over to Awesome Incorporated, but then I would hear later that, Bento is making Postocalypse, and I'd be like, oh, I would have loved to be a part of that. But, you just kind of have to pick there's so many other projects overlap, and you just kind of have to pick one or whatever is working with your own schedule. I remember Nate going over to Awesome Inc. I think it was right after you guys finished Too Many Cooks, and just kicking myself that I wasn't a part of the studio right at that moment when you guys made Too Many Cooks. I think I actually saw Too Many Cooks before it was released and just saw an early version of it. But I've missed out on so many little projects. I've also been a part of so many amazing projects, but you can't work on everything, sadly.
I was just going to say, I don't think I've ever felt older than when I was working with an animator at Archer. And I mentioned, I worked on Aqua Teen, and she's like, oh, my dad used to watch them when I was a kid. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Thanks for that, Savannah.